There are moments when you look around and quietly wonder why your life seems so different from everyone else's. You watch people build friendships with ease while you struggle to feel understood. You see others settling comfortably into places that have never felt like home to you. Even when you smile, even when you are surrounded by people, there is a loneliness that words cannot fully explain. You have tried to ignore it. You have questioned yourself because of it. You have even asked God in the silence of your own heart why your path has seemed marked by seasons of waiting, unexpected changes, and relationships that faded just when you thought they would last. Perhaps you have wondered whether something is wrong with you. Perhaps you have replayed conversations, searched for mistakes, and carried the quiet burden of believing that if only you were different, life would finally make sense. Yet deep inside, another question refuses to disappear. What if this unusual journey is not simply a series of random disappointments? What if God has been shaping your character through experiences that cannot yet be fully understood? Many faithful people throughout Scripture walked roads that others could not understand. Their circumstances often appeared confusing, even discouraging, before God's greater purposes became visible. Their stories remind us that faith is rarely formed in places of constant comfort. It grows through perseverance, trust, and the willingness to keep walking when the destination remains hidden. That does not mean every hardship is directly sent by God, or that every painful event has an explanation we can identify today. It does mean that God is able to work faithfully within every season, slowly transforming hearts even when circumstances remain difficult. Perhaps you have experienced the ache of being misunderstood. You tried to explain what was happening inside you, but the words never seemed sufficient. Friends offered simple answers that never reached the deeper questions you carried. Family members encouraged you to move on, yet they could not see the quiet struggle that followed you long after the conversation ended. You began carrying your thoughts alone, because explaining them became more exhausting than remaining silent. That silence sometimes felt heavy. It sometimes felt as though no one truly knew the battles taking place beneath the surface. In those quiet moments, prayer often becomes different than we imagined. Instead of eloquent words, there are sighs. Instead of confident declarations, there are whispered questions. Sometimes all that remains is the simple hope that God still hears what no one else can hear. Those prayers may feel small, but they are not forgotten. Scripture repeatedly reminds us that God is near to those whose hearts are burdened and weary. His presence is not measured by how clearly we feel Him in every moment, but by His enduring faithfulness through every season. You may have noticed that your life has not followed the timetable you expected. Opportunities appeared and disappeared. Doors opened only to close again. Plans that seemed certain dissolved without warning. Watching others move forward while you remain in a season of waiting can be deeply discouraging. Waiting often feels like standing still, yet spiritual growth frequently happens beneath the surface where no one else can see it. Just as roots grow quietly before branches reach toward the sky, character is often strengthened long before visible change arrives. If this reflection resonates with your own journey, you are welcome to share your experience in the comments. Many people carry these questions in silence, and hearing that someone else has walked a similar road can remind us that we are not alone. One of the hardest parts of living a different kind of life is resisting the temptation to measure yourself by someone else's story. Comparison quietly convinces us that our value depends upon matching another person's timeline, achievements, or relationships. Yet God never asks us to become another person. He patiently shapes each life according to His wisdom, often through experiences that are unique to that individual. This does not remove the pain of waiting, but it offers a different perspective. Instead of asking why your story looks unlike everyone else's, perhaps you can begin asking how God might be forming qualities that only this journey could develop. There are lessons that cannot be learned in comfort alone. Compassion often grows in those who have experienced sorrow. Patience is refined through seasons that refuse to move quickly. Humility develops when success cannot be manufactured by our own strength. Hope becomes stronger when it continues believing despite uncertainty. These are not easy lessons. Few people would willingly choose them. Yet throughout history, they have shaped people whose quiet faith became a source of encouragement for others. There will still be days when the questions return. There will still be evenings when the silence feels long and the future seems unclear. Faith does not eliminate those moments. Instead, it invites us to trust that God's work is often unfolding beyond what we can presently understand. Our vision is limited, but His faithfulness is not. Even when the next step remains hidden, we are invited to keep walking with Him one day at a time. Perhaps your life looks different because your journey has required different lessons. Perhaps the loneliness has awakened compassion that comfort never could. Perhaps the waiting has taught dependence that success alone would never have produced. Perhaps the unanswered questions have led you into a deeper relationship with God than certainty ever could. While you may not yet see the complete picture, your story is still being written, and God's grace continues to meet you within every chapter. Before this reflection ends, consider one quiet question. Instead of asking only why your path has been different, ask what kind of person you are becoming through it. That question may not remove every uncertainty, but it can gently shift your attention from circumstances you cannot control toward the faithful work God continues to accomplish within your heart. One day, one prayer, and one step of trust at a time. There comes a point when you stop expecting people to understand what you are carrying, because every attempt to explain it seems to create even more distance. Someone asks how you are doing, and you answer with the simplest words you can find, because the real answer would take hours, perhaps years, to tell. How do you explain the strange feeling that your heart has always been reaching for something you cannot fully describe? How do you explain why certain conversations leave you feeling empty, while moments spent alone with God somehow leave you feeling more understood than a crowded room ever could? Many people assume that if your life appears quiet, then your struggles must also be small. They cannot see the battles taking place beneath the surface. They do not see the nights when you wrestle with discouragement, wondering whether your prayers have gone unheard. They do not see the mornings when you choose hope again, not because every question has been answered, but because you have learned that faith often begins where certainty ends. One of the greatest misunderstandings about following God is the belief that faith removes every hardship. Yet throughout Scripture we repeatedly find people whose lives became more difficult after they chose to trust Him. Their circumstances did not immediately become easier. Their hearts were transformed while they continued walking through uncertainty. This does not mean suffering itself is good or that God delights in pain. Rather, it reminds us that He is able to redeem even the seasons we would never have chosen for ourselves. Sometimes what appears to others as a meaningless delay becomes the place where endurance quietly grows. Sometimes what feels like rejection becomes the beginning of discovering that our identity cannot ultimately depend upon the approval of other people. Perhaps you have noticed that you no longer fit into environments where you once felt comfortable. Conversations that once satisfied you now leave you restless. Priorities that once seemed important no longer carry the same weight. This change can be unsettling because it often feels like losing a familiar version of yourself before discovering the person God is shaping you to become. Growth is rarely comfortable. It stretches old assumptions, challenges familiar habits, and invites us to trust beyond what we can presently see. During that process, it is easy to mistake transformation for failure because both involve leaving something behind. Think about the moments when you questioned whether you had somehow fallen behind in life. You watched friends celebrate milestones while your own journey seemed suspended in waiting. You smiled sincerely for them, yet later found yourself asking God why your own season looked so different. Those moments require remarkable honesty. Envy is not always loud. Sometimes it quietly whispers that everyone else has been remembered while you have been overlooked. Yet comparison hides an important truth. You are comparing your unfinished chapter with someone else's visible moment. You cannot see the full story God is writing in either life. There are seasons when God seems silent, and that silence can become one of the greatest tests of faith. We naturally expect guidance to arrive through unmistakable answers, yet many believers have discovered that spiritual maturity often develops while continuing to trust even when immediate answers do not come. Silence is uncomfortable because it exposes where we have been placing our confidence. When every external reassurance disappears, we begin discovering whether our hope rests in changing circumstances or in God's enduring character. That discovery is rarely easy, but it can become deeply transformative. If you have ever lived through a season where nothing seemed to make sense, you are not alone. Many faithful people have walked through valleys where the next step remained hidden. They learned that faith was not pretending everything was fine. Faith was choosing to continue walking even while carrying unanswered questions. It was believing that God's goodness did not depend upon their ability to understand every detail of the journey. That kind of trust is not built in a single moment. It grows slowly through countless ordinary decisions to keep praying, to keep hoping, and to keep believing that God's presence remains constant even when emotions fluctuate. Perhaps the loneliness you have experienced has taught you something unexpected. It has shown you that your worth cannot be measured by how many people understand you. It has revealed that peace is not always found where the crowd gathers. Sometimes, the deepest moments of spiritual renewal happen when there is no audience, no applause, and no recognition. They happen quietly as your heart learns to rest in the assurance that God sees what others overlook. He sees every act of faithfulness that no one applauds. He knows every silent tear that never becomes part of another person's story. Nothing entrusted to Him is wasted. If this part of the journey reflects something you have lived through, share your experience with others. Your story may encourage someone who has quietly believed they were the only person walking through such a season. Honest testimonies often become reminders that God continues working in ordinary lives through ordinary people who simply refuse to give up. There is also a hidden freedom that begins growing within those who stop living primarily for human approval. It does not mean becoming indifferent to others or refusing wise counsel. Instead, it means recognizing that your deepest identity is not established by popularity, achievement, or constant validation. When your security begins resting more fully in God's love, the opinions of others no longer carry the same power to define you. Their encouragement remains valuable, but it is no longer the foundation upon which your heart stands. You may still encounter people who misunderstand your choices. Some may wonder why your priorities have changed. Others may question your hope during difficult circumstances because they cannot see what God has been cultivating within you. You do not need to answer every misunderstanding. Sometimes the clearest testimony is a life that quietly reflects growing patience, kindness, humility, and perseverance. Over time, transformed character often speaks more clearly than carefully prepared explanations. As you continue walking forward, remember that not understanding your entire journey does not mean your journey lacks meaning. Some chapters only become clear after we have already lived through them. Looking backward, we often recognize moments where God quietly sustained us, even when we believed we were walking alone. The same God who remained faithful then continues to walk with you now. Even if today's questions remain unanswered, His character has not changed. His love has not diminished. His promises to remain with His people continue to offer hope that reaches beyond the uncertainty of the present moment. Perhaps that is why your life has often seemed difficult for others to understand. Not because you are meant to feel superior or separate from everyone else, but because every person walks a unique path of growth with God. Your experiences, your struggles, your waiting, and even your unanswered questions have become part of a story that is still unfolding. You may not yet know how every piece fits together, but you can continue trusting that the one who began a good work within you has not abandoned it. Even in the quiet places, even in the confusing seasons, and even in the moments when no one else seems to understand, God remains present, patiently shaping a heart that learns to hope beyond what it can presently see. Perhaps one day you will look back on this season and realize that the hardest part was never the loneliness itself. It was believing that the loneliness meant you had been forgotten. It was assuming that because your life looked different, something must be wrong with you. It was carrying the quiet fear that everyone else had received a map while you had been left to wander without direction. Yet even now, after everything you have lived through, you are still here. Your heart may be tired, but it still searches for hope. Your faith may have been tested, but it has not completely disappeared. There is something remarkable about that. Not because you have been strong every day, but because God's faithfulness has quietly carried you through days when your own strength was no longer enough. Many people imagine spiritual growth as a series of dramatic moments, but more often it is found in ordinary acts of perseverance. It is choosing to pray when your emotions feel empty. It is choosing forgiveness when bitterness seems easier. It is choosing hope after disappointment has visited again and again. These decisions rarely receive recognition, yet they slowly shape the kind of heart that reflects Christ more deeply over time. There is a reason the deepest transformations are often invisible at first. We naturally focus on what can be measured, what can be celebrated, what others can easily see. God often begins somewhere entirely different. He works within motives, attitudes, desires, fears, and hopes. He patiently removes pride where we did not know it existed. He teaches compassion through our own wounds. He develops patience through delays that seem impossible to understand while we are living them. None of these lessons feel enjoyable in the moment. In fact, they often leave us asking why life has become so complicated. Yet, many people later recognize that the qualities they value most in their own character were formed during seasons they once begged God to remove. You may still wonder why certain relationships ended despite your best efforts. You may still grieve opportunities that never became reality. Those losses are real, and they deserve honest acknowledgement. Faith does not require pretending that pain never existed. Jesus himself wept, experienced rejection, and understood abandonment. Because of that, you never approach God with a sorrow he cannot understand. He meets broken hearts not with condemnation for feeling deeply, but with compassion that invites them to continue trusting him. The invitation is not to deny your grief, but to refuse allowing grief to become the final author of your identity. As you continue moving through life, there will always be voices trying to define your worth by visible success. They will ask why you have not accomplished certain things by a certain age. They will measure your life using standards that often ignore the condition of the heart. If you listen long enough, you may begin believing that your value depends upon keeping pace with everyone else. Yet Scripture repeatedly reminds us that God's perspective reaches far beyond temporary comparisons. He sees the entire story while we often see only the current page. What feels painfully slow to us may still be part of a faithful work unfolding according to His wisdom, rather than our preferred timetable. Imagine how different your life becomes when you stop interpreting every delay as evidence of failure. Instead of asking only why something has not happened yet, you begin asking what God is teaching you during the waiting. That single shift does not erase disappointment overnight, but it changes the direction of your attention. Waiting no longer becomes empty time. It becomes meaningful time. It becomes a place where trust is strengthened, where prayer becomes more honest, where gratitude slowly grows even before circumstances fully change. This perspective does not require certainty about the future. It simply rests in confidence that God's goodness is not limited by your present understanding. There will be people who never fully understand why your priorities changed. They may not understand why you value peace more than popularity, integrity more than recognition, faithfulness more than applause. That is all right. Not every chapter of your story is meant to be explained to everyone. Some parts of your journey exist primarily between you and God. Those hidden places often become the foundation upon which everything visible is eventually built. A tree survives storms because of roots no one applauds. In much the same way, a life of enduring faith is sustained by quiet moments that rarely receive attention from anyone else. Think about how many times you almost gave up. There were mornings when getting out of bed required courage. There were nights when your prayers contained more tears than words. There were seasons when you wondered whether continuing to hope would only lead to more disappointment. Yet here you are. Not because every problem disappeared, but because grace continued meeting you one step at a time. Looking back, you may even recognize small mercies that once seemed ordinary, a timely encouragement, an unexpected friendship, a passage of Scripture that arrived exactly when your heart needed it, a peace that quietly settled over you, even though your circumstances remained unchanged. These moments remind us that God is often present in ways we only recognize after they have already carried us through. If this journey has reflected your own life in some way, consider sharing what God has taught you through seasons of waiting or misunderstanding. Someone reading your words may discover the encouragement they have been searching for. Sometimes hope grows strongest when people honestly tell the stories of how God's faithfulness sustained them without pretending the road was easy. As this reflection comes to a close, remember that living a life others cannot fully understand is not evidence that your story lacks meaning. Every human life contains chapters that only God fully sees. Your experiences do not make you more valuable than anyone else, nor do they make you less loved because your journey has been difficult. They simply remind you that God patiently works within each person according to his wisdom and grace. The same Lord who has walked beside countless believers through seasons of confusion continues to walk beside you today. He has not abandoned you because the road feels unfamiliar. He has not forgotten you because answers have taken longer than you hoped. His faithfulness is not measured by immediate clarity, but by his constant presence through every season. So when the familiar questions return, when you again wonder why your path looks different from those around you, allow your heart to remember this simple truth. You do not need to understand everything today in order to trust the one who holds tomorrow. Your story is still unfolding. Your character is still being shaped. Your faith is still growing, sometimes in ways too quiet to notice from one day to the next. Continue walking faithfully. Continue praying honestly. Continue loving generously. Continue trusting patiently. One day you may discover that the life most people could not understand became the very place where you learned more deeply than ever before. That God's love was never dependent upon perfect circumstances. It remained steady through every question, every delay, every lonely night, and every uncertain morning. And because he remained faithful then, you can continue placing your hope in him today, believing that no season lived with God is ever without purpose, even when its meaning is revealed only one faithful step at a time.